So hello everyone, my name is Shek, Vice President of BAP-MAC. I have Sophie on the line of our Zoom call today. Hi to you.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I really appreciate it. So here at BAP-MAC, we're committed to building a community of support. And we know that these COVID times have made new norms for everybody, including us. We're here for you guys and to provide you guys with the most information we can. Without further ado, as I mentioned, we have Sophie, and Sophie's in her third year of her MDPhD program at McMaster University. So I really want to get right into it and ask Sophie, being in that MD-PhD program, a prestigious program with limited enrollment, enlighten those that aren't that familiar about the uniqueness of this program, the requirements, the length, who's fit for it, who's built for it, please.
So I just want to first off say thank you for having me on the call to answer these questions and to shed light on MD PhD programs, because I feel like we don't get the recognition that we need. A lot of people don't know that we exist. But basically an MD PhD program is what is called a dual degree program. So you have, by the end of the duration of the program, you get both an MD and a PhD. Depending on the school, the length of the program will vary between 7 to 8 years, but here at McMaster it is 7 years. So the way the program is typically structured is that you have an opportunity to do 1 year of your PhD upon entry into the program. Then you transition to pre-clerkship of medical school. You complete pre-clerkship and then you continue on to complete the rest of your PhD, which the PhD time in total is 4 years. So you do 3 years after pre-clerkship, and then after you defend your PhD, that's when you can go back and transition back to clerkship to finish out your medical school degree. So that's how it is typically structured at McMaster. The way that I did it, because there are 2 ways that you can enter. You can do direct entry, so you can apply while you're applying to med school. It's the same way. So after you finish your undergrad or after you finish your master's, then you can apply to enter directly. So you transition and you enter as an MD PhD. But what I did is I first applied as a med student and I got into McMaster's medical school program. And then afterwards is when I was a first year med student, I transitioned, I applied again to transfer to the MD PhD program. So the way that my program is structured is I completed all of pre-clerkship. I'm going to do 4 consecutive years of research to get my PhD. And then I'm going to transition back to clerkship to finish out the med degree. So just like background on like what is required of the program, it's the same requirements. Because it's dual degree, you still have to go through the OMSAS application for med. So with the basic requirements of like, you have to get the CAR score is what they consider at McMaster. You do your Casper. There's like the same GPA requirements for MD PhD as it is for MD program, where they look at your GPA requirements. On top of that, you do have to apply to the School of Graduate Studies, and there are specific programs that you can apply to. So I believe I'm in the Department of Biochemistry at McMaster, but I think there's also medical sciences, chemical biology, health policy. There's the MINDS program, which is like the neuroscience program here. There's like biomedical engineering, and I think I'm missing one. I think it's health research methodology.
We can always check it, yeah.
Yeah, but all of this information is on the website, but there is all of these programs that you can apply to. And as a part of that application process, you have to give a CV. You have to show that you have some extensive research background. There's a statement of interest that you have to write to show why you're interested in being in the program, and specifically what is your goals for doing an MD PhD. You have to specifically get 2 academic referees that can speak to your research experience. So usually what people get is either supervisors from undergrad research projects, or like their supervisor for like their thesis project in undergrad, or if you're applying as a master's student, then maybe your supervisor for your master's project. But this person is specifically for research.
So could those references be the same people you use for your med school application, or does it have to be different?
It could be the same people, but the letters should be structured differently, because what they're expecting from a medical school reference is kind of different than what they're expecting from an academic reference, specifically speaking to research. So you can use the same people and there could be overlap. I used the same people for my med that I did for this, because I think they could speak to multiple facets of my personality and like my research abilities, as well as like why I would make a good med student or like doctor. You do need people who can specifically speak to research. So someone who has seen you for an extended period of time in a research capacity or has experienced, like has seen you produce something and been productive in some regard in research wise. Because for the MD PhD program, there is a lot of emphasis on looking at your previous research abilities and research experience to be able to determine whether or not you'll be successful in the program. And something that I really want to emphasize is that with this program, you have to like research. Now, a lot of people, when they think of research, they think of like wet lab basic science, and that's not necessarily what you have to do. That's what I chose for myself. There's another thing that you have to be able to identify someone that you want to work with at the institution. So if there's not, you're responsible for finding your project supervisor. So if you're going through the research that exists at the institution and you don't find anything that interests you, then it might not necessarily be the place where you want to do an MD PhD. So going in, having identified like individuals that you're interested in working with is very important, because your supervisor and your project will make your experience as a PhD student. So it is hard. And I'm not going to mince my words. Like, it is a hard and long process. And so you need to be dedicated to the vision of MD PhD. And I don't think that, unless, this is my opinion, unless you are sure that you want to be in academic medicine and have some sort of capacity as like doing research in your career, if that's not what you want, I don't necessarily think it's justified for you to do an MD PhD program.
So I'm wondering, you've mentioned research, but what other quality does a student that wants to succeed in MD PhD really have?
I think specifically to speak to the MD PhD, I think that your perseverance needs to be at an all-time high, because it is a marathon of being in the program. I think that you need to have like a certain level of focus, that I think the commitment to the vision of being an MD PhD student and like doing my research is something that has gotten me through it. So you need to be committed to that. I think that there's anything else, because it's really dependent on what type of research that you want to pursue. So my experience as a PhD student doing basic like wet lab research is different than someone in health research methodology that's not necessarily bench work based. So I think that the core value for an MD PhD student is a commitment and enthusiasm for research and a commitment to the work.
Yes, that's very pertinent. Thank you for that. So what is a common week, pre-COVID, of course, what that consist of? Would it consist of early mornings and late nights, or was it just a balance? Can you have a balanced life is my question, essentially.
Okay, so because it's like our program is broken up, like a week in my life as a pre-clerkship student in the med stream is very different than what it is as a PhD student, because there's not a lot of overlap in the program. It's like for a portion of time I'm existing as a med student, and then I transition and I exist as a grad student, and I transition again and I exist as a med student. So the day in the life of a med student at MAC, we do a lot of small group learning, and it's a lot of problem-based learning. So you would have 2 tutorials a week where you would cover the materials. Then there was an anatomy session that you would do a week. You could book time with an anatomist. If you're really interested in surgery and you really want to up your anatomy skills, that was something that I would add to my week. So there's also once a week, we have a course called Professional Competencies, which talks about like more the social aspects of medicine. And we talk about social determinants of health and like the intersections between like an individual's identities and the medical system, and how we can help patients navigate through that system. And then of course there's clinical skills, but a lot of the time at MAC there's a lot of freedom and free time. So they have included an aspect of mandatory lectures. I think there are a couple of lectures a week. And so on top of that, there's like the rest of the week, it's really free for you to structure how you choose and how you choose to learn. So you can be shadowing physicians, you can be like focusing, going down and really digging deep into topics that interest you. So there's a lot of flexibility at McMaster for the medical program. Now, back in November 2019 is when I left the medical program and I started as a full-time grad student. So a grad student's life, at least in the life of a person who is doing bench work, there's a lot of flexibility. Because your supervisor is not going to micromanage you, it's up to you to produce results and show for what you've done. It's not like my supervisor is breathing down my neck telling me what experiments to run. But the way that I would do it is it would be like a typical work day. It would be like a 9 to 5 life. I would go into the lab at 9 and leave around 5. If I had a very large experiment, I could stay later. If I had something that I needed to do, I could stay earlier, but it's really up to me to structure my experiments as they work best for me. So it's really, there's a lot of flexibility, but there has to be a level of self-determination and self-motivation, because no one is going to tell you what to do.
This is the big leagues, basically. No one's here to clean your diaper. No one's here to look after you. That's fascinating. Thank you for that insight. So I want to move on to this next question now. In an ideal situation, ideal world, after you've done your PhD or MD-PhD, what is your dream practice after you graduate? What are you striving towards?
So I want to be a clinician scientist and I want to be in academic medicine. So my goal is to work in like a large center, like a large research center, and also so I can have like protected research time while also being a clinician, because the thing is with being a clinician scientist, it's like you're occupying two spaces. You're occupying the research space, but you're also being a physician at the same time. And being a physician is already time consuming and it's a full-time job. And being a researcher is time consuming and a full-time job. So there are specific positions that exist that allow you to have protected research time. So it says that, like, for example, 30% of your week is protected from all clinical duties, so you can go and focus on research. I want to find a position like that where I have protected time where I can do research. And specifically at this point, and as a third-year MD-PhD student, having completed pre-clerkship, this might change in the future, but my current goal is the field that I want to be in is neurosurgery. So after I complete this 7-year program, I would hope to match to a neurosurgical program. During my residency, I want to do some sort of postdoc so I can continue to build my research portfolio to eventually having a role at some hospital somewhere. Please, someone take me as a clinician, neurosurgeon, scientist. So that's my end goal.
I like that, having that vision. I know it can always change, but it's good to strive towards something. So with that, how much, matching with that program, how many more years would that add on to your experience? You don't want to go there?
We can talk about it, it's fine. So I think neurosurgical programs, residency programs are 6 years. Then if I want to do a postdocs are like 2 years. So like that comes to a total of like 8 years post finishing the 4 years I have left.
That's a beautiful path you've blazed for yourself. I really do hope it happens for you. Okay, we can move on to the next one. And this next question is, what health topics and what discussions really you hold close to heart? So I know about neurosurgery. Maybe you can dive deep into what your research consists of.
Yeah, so my research is, as I mentioned, I'm in the program, like the biochemistry department at McMaster, and I'm working in the wonderful Dr. Leslie McNeil's lab. I love her. She's a great supervisor. I just want to give her a shout out. Amazing individual, has made everything in my life so much better. But anyway, so my project is focusing on the impact of microbiota species on neurodegeneration in C. elegans models of Parkinson's disease. Generally, Parkinson's disease is like the second most common neurodegenerative disorder behind Alzheimer's disease. And there's a lot of research that's coming out that shows a correlation between the gut microbiome and its impact on human health, and specifically in diseases of neurodegeneration. But a lot of the research only shows like correlation, and there's not necessarily a lot of research that like emphasizes causation and like how specific microbiota species can impact neurodegeneration and either worsen or alleviate the phenotype, the Parkinson's disease phenotype, or potentially be a causative factor in development of the disease. So I use the model organism C. elegans, which is like a small worm. It's like 1 millimeter. It's like a prototypical model organism that's used in research. And I basically am looking to see what are the underlying mechanisms, both host and bacterial mechanisms, that are basically driving neurodegeneration in this model of Parkinson's disease. And I have a couple of models that I'm using, but that's kind of what my research is in. A lot of my undergraduate research was also in Parkinson's, but funnily enough, I was not actually a neuroscience student in my undergrad. I was in molecular genetics and microbiology. Okay. So yeah, so a lot of topics of genetics just generally interests me. Yeah, and I just really think that there's an elegance in genetics that doesn't exist anywhere else. And CRISPR is a thing of beauty. And I always find myself going back to reading up on different things of genetics and CRISPR and how it could potentially use to treat like genetic disorders and diseases.
That is really amazing. I hope that goes bad. I hope that goes well. I know you've hit a lot of roadblocks. I don't know if you want to share some stories of maybe thinking you have a discovery and it doesn't work out.
So I am, come September, I would officially have done 1 year of a PhD. And I think the largest roadblock for me, honestly, has been COVID. A lot, yes, a lot of the things pre-COVID, were just like your typical things, like experiments not working, you have a lot of variability. And it's a lot of, I think with basic science, a lot of the times you're doing a lot of things and nothing is necessarily working the way in theory it should work. And it's a lot of troubleshooting and trying to figure out what is going wrong. But I think the best advice that I've ever gotten regarding like experiments not working is like, do not dwell on things that do not work. If it doesn't work, do not waste your time trying to repeat a thing to get it perfect. Find another way to do that thing. And I think that that's the beauty of a PhD, because you have like the free range, of course, with the guidance of your supervisor to build experiments that would work. And then COVID hit when I decided to pivot, and everything was shutting down. And it was like, you just have all of this time, especially because I was early in my PhD, there was not a lot of like data that I could analyze from home. There was not a lot of things that I could do from home to advance my project. I could advance my understanding of the field, but not necessarily advancing the PhD, like creating data that I could present in my thesis defense. So I think that was the biggest roadblock. But now we're back, so everything has started again. So now I'm trying to like make up for lost time the best way that I can.
Okay. That makes sense as well. Okay, so let's switch gears a bit. Let's go into your road coming into your MDPhD program. What is the best advice or lesson that you ever received academically or anything about how to conduct yourself in your new environment?
When I first got into undergrad, I think that everyone, when you get into undergrad and you have even an inkling that you want to go into med school, even though you're not 100% sure, it's all the thing about like maximizing your GPA. And a lot of the times, the people that you see succeed do not necessarily study or function the same way that you do. So I think that a lesson that I had to learn was I had to take a lot of time and reflect on the best and most effective ways for me to succeed as a person, because it's not necessarily going to be the same as other people. So like my advice for undergrads is like truly sit down and just do an audit of how you study and how you learn. In med school, I think the best thing that I've learned is just show up, because you're not necessarily going to know everything. You're not necessarily going to be the most knowledgeable, but like if you just show up and you're there and you're present, I think that goes it goes a lot farther than people give it credit for. If you're like early on time and you're eager to learn and you just are the most empathetic and most compassionate version of yourself with every patient encounter you have, even though you don't have all of the knowledge, I think that would go far. And just showing up as a med student is something that I think has gone a long way. And then the third thing, as a grad student, I already alluded to it, but it's like, do not dwell on things that do not work. If something is not working, change it, find a different way to do that thing, find a different way to ask that question, find a different way to get answers to that question. And also, if you do not know something, ask for help. I think that applies to everything. It was very difficult for me to ask for help because I wanted to be, it's like, I feel like asking for help for me was like showing that I was incompetent. But the best thing that I have learned in my years on this earth is the ability to say, I don't know, but I will find out. Or I don't know, can you please tell me? And also being like, I need help, can you please help me? Those are the tenets of my life.
I would definitely rewatch this recording at one point, write this on a whiteboard, and just engrave it into my memory. That's very pertinent. Okay, thank you for that. So moving on, what has surprised you most about a career in medicine? What's something you wish you knew before even enrolling?
I don't know if something necessarily surprised me in medical school, because I think before deciding to commit to doing MD/MD PhD, I really spent time speaking to clinician scientists that I had encountered in my undergrad to kind of get an idea of what is it actually like, because I think a lot of the times people have like this romanticized ideal of what it would be to be in medicine and what it would be.
Grey's Anatomy, View, House Med.
At least what I had gotten from the mentors in my life who were talking to me is like, yes, there's a lot of it's like patient focused, and that your top priority should be your patients. But then there's also, of course, the bureaucracy behind medicine that you have to deal with. Medicine is just like mundane and could be paper pushing, and it's not always going to be exciting. But then I think that the worth of doing all of that work is like the impact that you can have on your patients. If you think that medicine is like this high and fast life, like yes, there are going to be moments that are high intensity, but it's not high intensity all of the time. And something that's specific to just med school, I think specific to McMaster, because it's a lot of, it's like a lot of like problem-based learning, and it's a lot of self-directed learning. I wouldn't say that I was shook, but I was shook when I got in, and there's not a lot of direction, and it's like you have to find a way to find out what information you need to learn, find the best way that you learn it. And I had done an autopsy on the best way that I learned in undergrad to kind of maximize my GPA trying to go into med school. But getting into med school, and specifically in the McMaster environment, I was humbled. And I had to reassess all of these habits that I had constructed in undergrad, because it was a different learning environment for a different purpose. Even when you become a practicing physician, there will always be new information that you will have to keep up on. So just building habits and building skills to be the most self-determined, the most self-directed that you can be.
Definitely. So forgive me for this assumption, but I'm gonna make one right now. You strike me as someone that knew early on where her interests lied. Am I correct? Where did this motivation, when did you decide to pursue your path or where you're going?
Okay, so I hate to be one of those people like back in high school. Back in high school, I actually didn't really have any idea of what my direction was. My best subject was actually English. So I was at some point when I was in, I think, what was it, like the 10th or 11th grade, I believed in my mind that I would do an English degree and maybe I would translate it into something else, like maybe I would like go to law school, maybe. So that was the thought that I had. And then I think it's when I took this course that it was like an introduction to anthropology, sociology, and psychology, that we had a neuroscience subunit under psychology, where I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever experienced in my life. So I was like, English is always something that I'm going to love, but I want to be fueled by an interest, which is why I pivoted and I was like interested in neuroscience. And then I was on this train that I was going to be a researcher for the longest time. And even entering into undergrad, like med school was not necessarily something that I was like strongly considering. Like I would not have said with my whole chest that I was a pre-med. I was be like, oh, I don't know, like research medicine. And then it was I did a science fair project when I was in my final year of high school, and it was actually with C. elegans, so full circle. It was Parkinson's with C. elegans, yeah. It was like a Parkinson's project with C. elegans and like establishing it as a model organism for Parkinson's disease. It was a great time. And the supervisors that I was working with for that science fair project were actually MD-PhDs, which was the first time I heard about the existence of this MD-PhD program. I went into undergrad with the idea that I'm just going to maximize my GPA so all of my options remain open. I decided that I wanted to try for medicine, that it was something that I was going to just try to apply to. So I did apply to medicine in third year. At that point, I was like, well, I don't want to necessarily just do research, because I'm obviously drawn by this med thing. Like this is a thing that is interesting me. And I was also always fascinated by how my supervisors, who ended up supervising me for like all 3 years of my undergrad, but like how they used their understanding, like their medical knowledge and their experience with patients to like guide their research. And I was like, that's what I want to do.
They're determined. So just to be clear, you're saying that in your last year of high school, the same project had you follow these mentors through your first years of undergrad. They followed you out throughout.
Yeah.
Where the wonders of life comes in for me. And I just want to switch gears slightly, because aside from this COVID pandemic, there has been a uprising with everything happening in the States right now with this Black Lives Matter movement, and just everyone being mentally healthy and trying to stay stable, because it is quite disheartening that it's happening in 2020. And there's a lot of social issues out there, so no one's ranking or whatnot. But I would like to see, in light of recent events, how important is representation in the medical field? What do you see? Is it getting better? Is it bad? Is it not a problem for you? Just elaborate on it, if you will.
In my experience, the higher I've gotten in like my post high school pursuits, the more, even in high school, I've always kind of been like the one of the only or the only Black person, usually only the only Black woman in any sort of space.
Yeah.
So I think at some point I've gotten used to it, which is like such a tragic thing to say. Just you get used to just like being the only one and just having to represent an entire diverse range of people, and it was very disheartening. So when I got into medical school, there are not a lot of people specifically at McMaster. So there's 5 of us across all 3 years. So that's like 612 people. There are 5 Black students, and we're all close, but that's nowhere near where we should be. And I think even prior to like the current, like everything with like the videos, like first it was Ahmaud Arbery and then George Floyd video when it dropped, and then people started like understanding and recognizing how anti-Black racism is just pervasive in our societies, like not only in the United States but also in Canada. And also, this is not to like take away from like other racism that exists. Like anti-Indigenous racism is also like just as bad, if not worse in some regards. So I think that before then, I was really interested in like trying to like offer my services to like not only BAP-MAC when I was in first year of med, so back in 2018. But now I think there's a lot of work that is required by medical faculties, not only McMaster, but like honestly, like across the country. U of T is like kind of trailblazing with like their BSAP program and like the results that has yielded. But I think across the country that there's a lot that is left to be desired. And I think that it's a lot of the times people are like, oh, are we just seeking diversity for diversity's sake? Which no, that is frankly annoys me, because there's so much research out there, if you just do your readings, that you can see the positive impact on patient outcomes when you have a workforce that is representative of the population that they are serving. So I think that people need to move away from the idea of race as a social determinant of health, and it's racism as a social determinant of health, and just move away from this idea of like race-based medicine, and just understand how the systemic racism and how that is impacting the health of individuals. And I think that diversifying not only like on race, but like sexual orientation, gender identity, also socioeconomic background, like just having a more diverse on all metrics can only benefit patients. And at the end of the day, it's all about the patients.
Yeah. Like, and I heard you mention about something, because I was reading about these disparities yesterday, actually, because that's really an area that's close to my heart. Because we can complain about everything, and rightfully complain, but it has to be about action. It can't be about what has been done, what will be done. And just to take you mentioned the BSAP application, there's a lot of misnomer and misconception about what that really is and what that effect has. I don't know if you have an opinion on it, if you want to clarify something that people usually hear, because I hear a lot of misconceptions about it.
Yeah, so I actually did, when I was applying to med school, I had applied to U of T as well, and I actually applied through the BSAP program. So a lot of the times people believe that BSAP is like an affirmative action-esque program, or that there's like they lower requirements and there's a specific quota of students that need to be, like Black students that need to be accepted. That is not the case. Your application is the same as all other med students. The academic requirements are the same for all other med students. So you still need to have a high GPA. You still need to have the MCAT score, like the basic cutoff requirement, because I think U of T, it's more of a cutoff basis, but you still need to have the same statistics as all other applicants. The only thing that changes with BSAP is in the application, you write an additional essay, which explains why, which is just a simple question about like, I think for me, I don't know if they've changed it, but when I went through the application, it's like, why did you choose to apply through BSAP? And then during the file review process, what they try to do is they try to ensure that there are Black community members who are reviewing your application, because research shows that that there's implicit bias that could exist in like people who do review the application process, and having a more diverse pool of people reviewing applications can actually help to pull out applicants that may otherwise have been marginalized in the process. So again, you're in the same stream as everyone else. There's just more diverse people who are reviewing your application. And then in the interview process, they also want to have a more diverse interview panel. So I think what they call it at U of T is that they have the multiple panel interview. I think it's multiple panel interviews, MPI or something. It's not the MMI like at McMaster. So it's like 4 stations. And in my experience, I was still in the same interview circuit as non-Black students. It was just that they ensured on a day that there were Black students that were interviewing, that there was a minimum of 1 Black interviewer in the process. So in my circuit, I was again with non-Black students going through the same circuit with the same questions, but it was just one of my 4, there was 1 Black interviewer who was interviewing me. And then there was an optional lunch after the interview process that had no impact on me getting into the program. It was like organized by the Black Medical Students Association at U of T, that you had the option to meet Black medical students and talk with other Black applicants. And that is what the BSAP program is. So again, I think that a lot of the times, a lot of the misconceptions is like people think that we're lowering standards, whatever that means, for entry into medical school, and that it's easier to get in, or that the Black students that get in are less qualified. No, no, and no. It's actually just seeking equity and leveling the playing field.
Thank you very much for that insight. That does conclude my questions for today. Thank you for being so patient. Thank you for your eloquence and just elaborating on these topics that are greatly going to help our listeners and anyone that listen to it.
Also, I'm always open to anyone sending me emails if you're interested in MD PhD, if you're just interested in MD, like I can give my contact information to BAP-MAC. So after you see this, if you have any more questions, just email me. I live on my phone. I probably will respond within 48 hours.
Perfect, thank you. And that's the beauty of it. You've heard it here first. We're just trying to set up a community of support to make us feel like people have done this before, so you don't have to go through it alone. If you've enjoyed this, if you want questions answered, if you want certain people interviewed, once again, feel free to reach out. Feel free to hit us up. We're here for you guys. Thank you.